Marcus owns 4 rental properties in Columbus, Ohio. 2 of them have been occupied by the same tenant since 2019. He has never once chased a late payment from those 2 units. Not during the pandemic, not during the 2022 inflation spike. Not once. And both of those tenants pay rent using a federal housing voucher. That is not a coincidence. Most people hear Section 8 and picture a welfare program. They think of bureaucracy, government red tape, difficult tenants, inspections, headaches. And because of that picture, most private real estate investors walk right past what sophisticated landlords have quietly been building for decades. Recession-proof, government-backed cash flow that most of the investing world ignores because the branding is wrong. Here is what Section 8 actually is mechanically at the federal level. The Housing Choice Voucher Program, Section 8, is a federal rental assistance program administered by the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, known as HUD. It currently serves approximately 2.3 million households across the country, according to HUD's own data as of December 2024. For fiscal year 2024, Congress appropriated $32.39 billion specifically for tenant-based Section 8 vouchers, making this the largest discretionary program in HUD's entire budget. According to the Congressional Research Service, $32 billion, flowing directly to private landlords every year. That number matters because it tells you something about the durability of this program. You do not appropriate $32 billion a year for a program you're planning to cancel next quarter. This is structural government spending, embedded in the federal budget the way Medicare or highway funding is embedded. Marcus understood that. Most investors do not. Here's how the mechanism actually works, because this is where the real insight lives. When a qualifying low-income household receives a housing voucher, they find a private rental unit, an apartment, a single-family home, a townhouse, whose landlord agrees to participate in the program. The local public housing authority, or PHA, then inspects the unit to verify it meets HUD's housing quality standards. If it passes, both parties sign a housing assistance payment contract called a HAP contract. That contract is between the landlord and the government, not the tenant, the government. Under that HAP contract, the PHA pays the landlord the subsidy portion of the rent directly, typically arriving early each month. The tenant pays their share, which by program design cannot exceed 30 to 40% of their adjusted monthly income. The government covers the rest, which in many markets is 70 to 100% of the total rent. The government's portion does not bounce. It does not shrink when the tenant loses a job. Housing assistance payments have historically been among the most reliable rent payments available to private landlords, a track record built across decades of recessions, financial crises, and a global pandemic. Think about what that means from a cash flow underwriting perspective. When Marcus bought his first property in 2017, he was worried about the same thing every landlord worries about: vacancy and non-payment. Those 2 risks eat cash flow. A single month of vacancy on a $1,200 unit costs you $1,200. A tenant who goes 3 months without paying costs you $3,000 plus legal fees. Every conventional real estate model has to price in those risks. Section 8 effectively removes the government's share of the rent from that risk category entirely. This is the retention piece, and this is where the compounding advantage starts to become visible. Section 8 tenants on average stay in their units for 5 to 7 years, compared to 1 to 2 years for typical market rate renters, according to BNB Calc's analysis of HUD program data. The reason is structural, not cultural. Voucher holders have often waited years, sometimes a decade, to receive their voucher. They have strong incentives to maintain eligibility, avoid lease violations, and keep their housing stable. The voucher is their most valuable financial asset. Losing it means going back to the end of a waiting list that, in many cities, stretches for years. For a landlord, fewer turnovers mean fewer vacancy months, fewer cleaning and repair cycles between tenants, fewer advertising costs, and a more predictable annual income. Those are not soft benefits. Every turnover costs a landlord real money in time and dollars. If you reduce turnover by even 1 cycle every 5 years across a small portfolio of 4 units, the savings compound meaningfully over a decade. Now, this is where Priya comes in and where the story gets more complicated. Priya works in property management in Atlanta. She had watched investors like Marcus talk about Section 8 for years, and she decided in 2022 to buy a duplex and accept vouchers in one of the units. She knew the theory, but she ran into the part that theory tends to skip. The inspection process has real teeth. HUD updated its inspection protocol to something called the National Standards for Physical Inspection of Real Estate, which went into effect for HCV landlords in 2025. The standard is not punishing by design, but it is specific. Working smoke detectors, no visible lead paint hazards, adequate heating, proper window conditions, functioning plumbing. If the unit fails inspection, the subsidy does not start until it passes. Priya's unit failed on the first inspection. A broken exterior door hinge and insufficient smoke detector placement. She fixed both issues within a week, passed on reinspection, and moved forward. But she lost 3 weeks of subsidy timing she had not planned for. And that is actually the honest answer to the question most people ask first. If Section 8 is so reliable, why doesn't every landlord do it? The payments are not the barrier. The barrier is the front-end work, the inspection process, the paperwork, and the coordination with your local housing authority. That setup requires patience and attention that some landlords do not want to spend. The landlords who do spend it tend to stay in the program for a long time. The second thing Priya learned is the fair market rent ceiling. HUD publishes fair market rents, called FMRs, annually for every metropolitan area and county in the country. The local PHA sets its payment standard somewhere within a range allowed by that FMR. If the market rent on your unit is above that payment standard, the tenant has to make up the difference out of their own pocket, which can push their share above 30% of income and make the unit less attractive to voucher holders. Priya's asking rent was right at the payment standard, which worked. But in high-cost markets where rents have outpaced FMR updates, this creates a mismatch. Some landlords in San Francisco or Boston find that the gap between FMR and actual market rent is wide enough that accepting vouchers means taking a haircut on revenue. In mid-cost markets, Columbus, Indianapolis, Memphis, Cleveland, San Antonio, that gap is typically smaller or non-existent. Investors often target markets like Columbus for that reason. Stay with this, because the demand side of this equation is something most investors have never actually looked at. The waiting lists for Section 8 vouchers are not short. They are not slightly backed up. In San Diego, as of early 2026, the local housing authority publicly stated it does not expect to pull new families off the waiting list for several more years. In Rochester, New York, the Housing Authority opened its voucher waiting list in May 2024. Approximately 20,000 people applied for 4,000 slots. That was in a mid-sized city. The national demand for these vouchers vastly exceeds supply. According to HUD data, only about 1 in 4 eligible households actually receives a voucher. What that means for a landlord who accepts vouchers is simple. You are never short of qualified, motivated applicants. The moment a voucher holder unit becomes available, your local PHA typically has a pool of pre-screened households ready. Vacancy time shrinks. And because the voucher holder has waited months or years for this moment, their incentive to keep the unit and maintain their voucher is strong. Marcus is not naive about the program's risks. He screens voucher tenants the same way he screens anyone else. Income documentation, rental history, references. The voucher covers the government's portion. It does not guarantee perfect tenant behavior or zero property wear. 2 of his 4 properties are Section 8, 2 are not. He treats the Section 8 units as his base layer, the part of his portfolio that keeps cash flowing when the economy gets strange. In 2020, his market rate tenants missed payments. His Section 8 tenants did not, because the government's portion kept arriving regardless. That is the recession test. During the COVID-19 pandemic, research published by the Turner Center for Housing Innovation at UC Berkeley found that the Housing Choice Voucher program and other rent subsidies stabilized landlord revenue in ways that market rate units could not match. The subsidy is counter-cyclical. When private tenant income falls, the voucher covers the gap. The landlord's exposure to the economic cycle is partially insulated. Now, here is the reframe that most investors never get to, and it is the one worth sitting with. The standard way to think about Section 8 is as a tenant assistance program. The government helps low-income households pay rent. That framing is accurate, but it is also incomplete. The other way to read the same program, and the way sophisticated landlords have read it for decades, is as a federal government revenue guarantee attached to private real estate. The HAP contract is not a charity arrangement. It is a binding legal contract between you, a private landlord, and a government agency backed by $32 billion in annual congressional appropriations. The government is your co-tenant. The government is paying you directly. And that portion of your rent sits in a completely different risk category than anything a private tenant can offer you. Most people running real estate portfolios spend enormous energy managing tenant risk. Section 8 does not eliminate that risk, but it bifurcates it. The government's share of your rent is separated from the tenant's employment status, their health, their family situation, their financial discipline. It sits in a different category of risk entirely. That is not a small thing. Marcus has a phrase for it. He calls the government's portion the anchor. The anchor does not move. The anchor shows up early each month. And because the anchor does not move, the rest of his financial planning becomes more precise. Priya has 3 properties now. One is Section 8. She runs the numbers annually and adjusts based on her local FMR updates. She does not treat Section 8 as a strategy to avoid. She treats it as a tool with a specific risk profile, one that requires patience in setup, discipline in screening, and a willingness to work within HEED's inspection framework. In exchange, it gives her something that most landlords chase and rarely find, a portion of her monthly income that does not depend on whether the economy cooperates. The trap is not inside Section 8. The trap is in ignoring the mechanism while everyone else debates the politics.